Abeni had always known struggle. Born into a poor family in the heart of a small village, she learned early on that wealth dictated a person's worth. In a place where social standing meant everything, the poor were treated like shadows, seen but never truly acknowledged. Yet, despite the hardships, Abeni held on to hope. She believed that family was above all else, that love was not measured by wealth, but by the bonds shared through blood and sacrifice. From a young age, she worked tirelessly to support her parents and siblings. Whether it was fetching water from the distant river, helping her mother sell vegetables in the market, or taking care of her younger siblings, Abeni never complained. Even when she was scolded unfairly, even when her empty stomach twisted in pain while others feasted, she remained loyal. She smiled through the suffering, thinking that one day things would change. But the world was unkind to those without gold. In her village, the wealthy lived in grand homes with high walls and servants, while the poor barely had enough to eat. The gap between them was not just in possessions, but in the way they were treated. The rich were greeted with respect, their words carried weight, and they decided the fate of those beneath them. The poor, on the other hand, were invisible, useful only when needed, discarded when not. Abeni's family had always wished for a better life, but they had come to resent their poverty. Her father, once a proud man, grew bitter with time. Her mother, exhausted and defeated, saw Abeni as just another burden rather than a daughter. Her siblings followed suit, treating her with indifference or even cruelty when she failed to bring home enough food. They had no patience for dreams, no time for the foolish hope she carried in her heart. Then came the moment that shattered her world. It was a cold evening when her father made the decision. He had been drinking, his temper flaring as he looked at Abeni with disdain. "You bring nothing but hunger and misfortune," he said, his voice sharp. "There is no place for you here." Her mother remained silent, eyes downcast, unwilling to argue. Her siblings looked away, as if she had already disappeared. Abeni stood frozen, unable to believe what she was hearing. She had given everything for this family, her childhood, her strength, her love. And yet, in their eyes, she was nothing. The rejection cut deeper than any wound. With nowhere to go and no one to turn to, she had no choice but to leave. Clutching the few belongings she had, she stepped out into the night, the weight of her family's betrayal pressing down on her. As she walked away from the only home she had ever known, she made a silent vow to herself. If the world would not give her a place, she would carve one out for herself. And one day, she would return, not as the girl they had cast aside, but as something far greater. The night air was cold against Abeni's skin as she walked away from her village, her heart heavy with pain. She had nothing but a small bundle of clothes and the fading warmth of a home that no longer wanted her. The road ahead was uncertain, but she had no choice. She could not turn back. Hunger struck first. Without food or shelter, Abeni wandered aimlessly, relying on the kindness of strangers who barely acknowledged her presence. She begged for scraps outside market stalls, only to be chased away like an animal. She slept under trees, curled up against the cold ground, her stomach aching. The nights were the worst, filled with loneliness and fear. Every rustling leaf made her heart pound. Every distant howl reminded her of how vulnerable she was. Days turned into weeks, and Abeni learned to survive in ways she never imagined. She scavenged for food where she could, drank from rivers, and avoided places where she knew she wasn't welcome. But the pain of being unwanted hurt more than hunger. She often wondered if her family thought of her, if they missed her, even a little. But deep down, she knew the truth. They had cast her out without hesitation. One evening, weak from starvation, Abeni collapsed near the outskirts of a bustling town. She lay on the dusty road, unable to move, her body betraying her. Just as darkness threatened to take over, a shadow fell upon her. "Are you all right, child?" A soft voice broke through her daze. A woman, her face kind but marked with the lines of experience, knelt beside her. She carried a woven basket filled with fruit and bread. The scent of food made Abeni's stomach twist painfully. The woman, who introduced herself as Mama Jara, helped Abeni sit up and handed her a piece of bread. "Eat," she urged gently. Abeni hesitated, but the need for survival overpowered her pride. She took small bites, tears stinging her eyes at the simple kindness she had not known in so long. Mama Jara was a merchant, a widow who had built a small business selling textiles. She saw something in Abeni, strength hidden beneath exhaustion. "You remind me of myself when I was young," she said, offering Abeni a place to stay in exchange for helping with her trade. For the first time in a long while, Abeni felt hope. She worked hard, learning how to weave fabrics, bargain with traders, and manage accounts. Mama Jara did not treat her like a burden, but as someone with potential. She spoke to Abeni about independence, about rising above circumstances, about creating her own destiny. The hardships Abeni had faced had not broken her. They had forged her into someone stronger. She no longer wished for her family's approval. She wanted to build a life where she would never be at anyone's mercy again. And with each passing day, she grew closer to that goal. Abeni woke up every morning before sunrise, her hands rough from work, her mind sharp with new knowledge. Under Mama Jara's guidance, she learned not just the art of textiles, but the skill of negotiation, the language of trade, and the power of self-worth. Yet the world did not make it easy for a poor girl with no name. The market was dominated by older traders who had built their businesses through generations. They scoffed at her presence, dismissing her as nothing more than an orphaned beggar. Some refused to deal with her, while others tried to cheat her, assuming she was too naive to notice. Even customers hesitated, questioning why they should buy from a girl who had nothing to her name. The doubts crept in, whispering cruel reminders of where she came from. "You are still that abandoned girl," they seemed to say. But Abeni refused to listen. She worked harder, absorbing every lesson Mama Jara taught her. When others dismissed her, she watched and learned in silence. When they tried to cheat her, she memorized every trick and turned it to her advantage. One day, an opportunity arrived in the form of a wealthy merchant from the city. He was looking for rare, high-quality fabrics, something unique that could not be found in ordinary markets. Abeni saw her chance. She knew Mama Jara's collection was beautiful, but it needed something more. With a boldness she did not know she possessed, she spent nights designing intricate patterns inspired by the stories of her village, the rivers, the stars, and the people. When the merchant visited, she presented her work with confidence. He examined the fabric, his fingers running over the delicate embroidery, his eyes narrowing in thought. Finally, he nodded. "This is unlike anything I've seen before," he admitted. "I will buy all of it." It was Abeni's first major sale. Mama Jara beamed with pride, and the other traders, who had once dismissed her, watched with newfound respect. The victory was small, but it was enough to prove that she was more than just a poor girl. She was a force to be reckoned with. With the money from the sale, Mama Jara helped Abeni invest in more materials, encouraging her to create her own designs. The road ahead was still filled with challenges, but now Abeni knew one thing for certain. She had the power to carve out her own destiny. She was no longer just surviving, she was rising. Years passed, and Abeni was no longer the frail girl who had once been cast out into the night. She had become a woman of power, wisdom, and resilience. The business she had once struggled to establish alongside Mama Jara had flourished into something far greater than she had ever imagined. Her fabrics were now sought after by nobles, traders, and even royalty. What had started as simple textiles had evolved into a thriving empire. Abeni expanded beyond the market stalls, opening workshops where skilled artisans were trained under her guidance. She employed other young girls who had been abandoned or overlooked by society, giving them opportunities she had once longed for. Through sheer determination and an unbreakable will, she had created not just a business, but a legacy. With success came influence. Merchants who had once ridiculed her now sought her approval. Village elders who had once ignored her presence now spoke her name with admiration. Even powerful leaders in distant cities knew of the young woman who had built an empire from nothing. They invited her to counsel on trade, to advise on economic matters, to shape policies that would benefit not only the rich, but the forgotten poor. Yet, despite all she had gained, Abeni never forgot where she had come from. She remained kind, but never weak. She was generous, but never a fool. She had learned that power was not about wealth alone. It was about knowing when to be firm and when to show mercy. There were times when people from her past returned, those who had once mocked or ignored her, hoping to gain favor now that she was someone of importance. She did not seek revenge, but neither did she allow herself to be used. She had learned to recognize false smiles and empty words. Mama Yara, now older and watching with pride, often told her, "You have become more than just a successful woman. You have become a leader, a force of change." And Abeni knew it was true. She was no longer a girl begging for acceptance. She was a woman who commanded respect, not through fear, but through the undeniable strength of her journey. Yet deep in her heart, there remained one unresolved part of her past, the family that had once rejected her. She had buried the pain beneath years of hard work and success, but it had never truly disappeared. And now, as whispers of her name reached even the village that had cast her out, she knew that the time had come. She would return, not as the girl they had thrown away, but as the woman they never believed she could become. Abeni had long buried the memories of her childhood, locking them away in the depths of her mind. But when news reached her that her old village was struggling, facing famine, debt, and conflict, something inside her stirred. The place that had once cast her out was now on the brink of ruin. She had no reason to return. She owed them nothing, and yet she found herself preparing for the journey. Her arrival was nothing short of grand. She rode at the head of a caravan, her wealth displayed in the fine fabrics draped over her carriage, the gold embroidery of her garments shimmering in the sun. Her entourage, merchants, guards, and advisors moved with the discipline of a well-trained unit. The once poor girl, whom the village had discarded, now carried herself like a queen. The villagers gathered as whispers spread like wildfire. Some recognized her immediately, their eyes wide with shock. Others, seeing the powerful woman before them, could hardly believe she was the same Abeni they had cast aside. Her family stood among them, frozen in disbelief. Her father, once so proud and authoritative, now looked older, weaker. Her mother, once indifferent, clutched her hands together, as if searching for the right words. Her siblings, who had mocked her, now stood silent, unsure of whether to meet her gaze or lower their heads in shame. Abeni stepped down from her carriage, her expression unreadable. The weight of her past and present collided in that moment. She saw the hunger in their faces, the desperation in their eyes. They had once rejected her for being poor, but now they were the ones struggling to survive. The choice before her was clear: revenge or forgiveness. She could remind them of their cruelty, turn her back on them as they had done to her. She could watch them suffer, knowing they had made their choice long ago. A part of her, the wounded child within, craved justice. But Abeni was no longer that child. She had built herself into something greater, not out of hatred, but out of strength. And true power was not in vengeance, but in mercy. She turned to the village chief, speaking in a voice that carried authority. "I have come not as the girl you abandoned, but as a woman who has found her own path. If you wish to rebuild this village, I offer my help. But not as a beggar returning home. I come as a leader, and I will only help those willing to work for a better future." A hush fell over the crowd. Her family looked at her, searching for something, perhaps a sign that she still longed for their love. But Abeni had moved beyond seeking approval. She had returned not to be accepted, but to show them that she had never needed their acceptance to begin with. Abeni stood before the family that had once cast her out, their faces lined with guilt, uncertainty, and perhaps even hope. The silence between them stretched, heavy with unspoken words and years of separation. Her father was the first to speak, his voice, once filled with authority and pride, now wavered with age. "Abeni, we never thought we'd see you again," he said, avoiding her gaze. "Life was hard back then. We did what we thought was necessary to survive." Her mother nodded, wringing her hands together. "We had nothing, Abeni. We could barely feed ourselves. Keeping you, it felt impossible." Abeni felt the old wounds stir. She remembered the nights she had gone to bed hungry while her siblings ate. She remembered the harsh words, the cold stares, the way they had thrown her aside as if she meant nothing. The pain had never left her. It had simply been buried beneath years of struggle and success. Her younger siblings, once indifferent to her suffering, now looked at her with something resembling admiration. They had been children when she was cast out, too young to understand the cruelty of their actions. Now, they saw her for what she had become, a woman of power, a force they could no longer ignore. "You had a choice," Abeni said, her voice even but firm. "And you chose to abandon me." Her father sighed, looking away. "We thought you wouldn't survive." "But I did," she said, stepping closer. "And I did it without you." Some villagers, witnessing the exchange, murmured among themselves. Some were ashamed, remembering how they had turned their backs on her. Others remained skeptical, their pride preventing them from acknowledging the injustice they had done to her. One elder, a woman who had always been kind to Abeni as a child, spoke up. "We were wrong to turn away from you, Abeni. But the village is suffering now. We have lost too much. Will you punish us for the past, or will you help us rebuild?" Abeni studied their faces, the regret, the desperation, the hope. She had spent years imagining this moment. She had once dreamed of returning to prove them wrong, to show them that she had thrived despite their cruelty. But standing here now, she realized that proving herself to them no longer mattered. The child inside her still ached for the love she had never received. But the woman she had become knew that love was not something to be begged for. Finally, she took a deep breath. "I did not return for revenge," she said. "I came because I believe in creating something better. If you are willing to work for it, I will help this village rise again. But I do not seek your acceptance. I have built a life without it." Her family lowered their heads, realizing that they had lost her, not in body, but in spirit. She was no longer theirs to reject or reclaim. She belonged to herself now. Abeni stood before the gathered villagers, her decision made. She had returned not as a beggar, not as a lost daughter seeking love, but as a leader. She saw the suffering in their eyes, the weight of years of struggle pressing down on them. And despite everything, she knew she could help. "This village cast me out when I was weak," she said, her voice steady. "But I have returned strong. I will not punish you for the past, nor will I seek vengeance. Instead, I will do what true leaders do. I will build." A murmur spread through the crowd. Some looked relieved, others ashamed. A few still held on to their pride, unwilling to admit they had been wrong about her. But Abeni did not need their approval. She had outgrown the need for validation long ago. She wasted no time in putting her vision into action. She gathered workers and invested in rebuilding the village. Schools were constructed, giving children, especially young girls, the opportunity to learn and break free from the cycle of ignorance and poverty. Abeni knew firsthand what it meant to be denied opportunity, and she refused to let another child suffer the same fate. She built a marketplace where women could trade, ensuring that no one would have to struggle the way she once had. Roads were improved, water wells were dug, and a small clinic was established so that no family would lose a loved one to treatable illnesses. As the village transformed, so did its people. Those who had once scorned her now looked to her for guidance. They saw that true power did not come from gold or titles, but from leadership, vision, and the ability to uplift others. Her family watched her efforts with mixed emotions. Her mother, overwhelmed by guilt and pride, tried to reconnect, offering quiet gestures of care. A warm meal sent to her home, soft words spoken when they crossed paths. Abeni accepted them, but with caution. Some wounds could heal, but others would always remain as scars. Her younger siblings, now grown, sought her out more openly. They asked about her life, her journey, and how she had achieved so much. She shared her wisdom with them, not as their sister longing for their love, but as a woman who had forged her own path. Her father, however, remained distant. His pride would not allow him to fully acknowledge his mistakes. He spoke little, watching from the sidelines as Abeni shaped the village into something greater than he had ever imagined. In the end, Abeni did not seek revenge, nor did she seek love from those who had abandoned her. She had found something far greater: purpose. She had returned, not as a rejected daughter, but as a queen in her own right. And through her mercy, she had built a legacy that would outlive the pain of the past. The village that once cast Abeni out was no longer the same place. Under her leadership, it transformed from a struggling settlement into a thriving community. The dusty roads she had once walked barefoot were now lined with bustling markets. The children who once had no future now attended schools built with her vision. The sick no longer suffered in silence, as healers and midwives worked in the small but well-equipped clinic she had funded. Her influence reached every corner of the village. Farmers learned better techniques to increase their harvests. Traders expanded their businesses beyond the village borders. And women, once confined to the background, became active members of the economy. Abeni did not just give them wealth. She gave them the tools to sustain themselves. Those who had once mocked her, The same people who had dismissed her as a useless girl now sought her advice. The elders who had ignored her existence now invited her to council meetings, recognizing her wisdom. Even the wealthiest families, who had once looked down on her, now spoke her name with respect. But Abeni did not let her success make her blind to the realities of power. She knew firsthand how easily the weak could be cast aside, how quickly a village could turn on its own. So she enforced new rules, rules that ensured no child would be abandoned the way she had been. No one shall be rejected because they are poor, she declared in a village meeting. Every child will have access to food, education, and care. No family will be forced to choose between survival and love. The village council agreed, for they could not deny that her leadership had brought prosperity. With laws in place to protect the vulnerable, the village became known not only for its trade and wealth, but also for its fairness and humanity. Beyond the village, Abeni's story spread across the region. Travelers spoke of the girl who had been cast out, only to return as a queen. Merchants in distant cities told her tale as an example of resilience and wisdom. Young girls whispered her name with admiration, seeing in her a future they had never dared to imagine for themselves. Her legend grew, not because of her riches, but because of the way she had risen above bitterness. She had been given every reason to destroy the village that had wronged her, yet she had chosen to save it instead. One evening, as she stood on the balcony of her grand home, overlooking the village that had once abandoned her, Abeni felt no longing for the past, no ache for the love she never received. She had built something greater than revenge. She had built a legacy. And in that moment, she knew. She had won. Not against her family, not against the village, but against the fate that had once tried to break her. As the village flourished under Abeni's leadership, her family could no longer avoid the truth. She was no longer the helpless girl they had abandoned. She had risen far beyond them. The weight of their past actions pressed heavily upon them, and at last they gathered the courage to face her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light over the village, her father, mother, and siblings stood before her. There was no arrogance in their stance, no excuses left to give, just the raw truth of their shame. Her father was the first to speak. "Abeni, we wronged you," he admitted, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it before. "We let fear and desperation guide us. We should have protected you, but instead, we pushed you away." Her mother, tears glistening in her eyes, stepped forward. "We have watched you rebuild what we once thought was lost. You became more than we ever dreamed possible. And yet, we were never there for you." Her siblings, now grown, nodded in agreement. "We were too young to understand then, but now we do. We don't deserve your forgiveness, but we ask for it anyway." Abeni felt her chest tighten. She had dreamed of this moment, of hearing them admit their mistakes. But now that it had arrived, she found herself unsure of what to do with it. She had spent years hardening herself against the pain they had caused. She had survived without their love, built her own destiny, and proved to the world that she was more than what they had believed. Did she still need their acceptance? Her silence stretched, and she saw the sorrow in their eyes. Then she spoke. "Love should not be given based on wealth or status," she said firmly. "A true family stands together in hardship, not just in prosperity. What you did to me was cruel, but it also shaped me into who I am today." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Forgiveness is not about erasing the past. It is about choosing to move forward. I cannot forget what happened, but I refuse to let it control me any longer." Her father lowered his head, his hands trembling. We cannot change what we did, but if there is any way we can make amends, we will. Abeni studied them for a long moment, then took a deep breath. I have already built a life without you, she said, and I will not stay here, waiting for a love that was once denied to me. She turned toward the village, the place she had transformed with her own hands. But if you truly want to change, then start by treating others with the kindness you once denied me. Let no one else suffer the way I did. With that, she made her choice. She would not stay in the village that had once rejected her. Her destiny was greater than this place. She turned away, walking toward the life she had built. A life of strength, purpose, and freedom. As Abeni walked away from the village that had once cast her out, she did not look back. She had given them the gift of mercy, the chance to change, but her path no longer lay among them. She had outgrown the need for their acceptance. She had built her own destiny, and she would continue forward, carrying her legacy with her. Years passed, and her influence only grew. The village she had once been forced to leave thrived because of the foundations she had laid. Schools educated children who might have otherwise been forgotten. Women ran businesses, elders led with fairness, and no child was ever abandoned for being poor. The people spoke of Abeni with reverence, their voices filled with admiration rather than shame. Her name became a symbol of hope. Travelers passing through the village heard her story and carried it to distant lands. Merchants spoke of the girl who had been rejected, only to return as a queen. Mothers told their daughters about her strength, reminding them that one's worth was not determined by birth, but by resilience and determination. Abeni herself continued to grow her empire, not just in wealth, but in influence. She used her power to uplift those who, like her, had been cast aside. She built schools in other villages, established trade routes that benefited the poor, and mentored young women who dreamed of a better future. She had no royal title, but people called her a queen nonetheless, the queen of the forgotten, the ruler of the resilient. Yet, despite all she had achieved, Abeni understood the true meaning of power. It was not in riches or status. It was in the ability to rise after being knocked down. It was in choosing mercy over vengeance, wisdom over anger. And above all, it was in knowing that family was not just the people who shared your blood, but those who stood by you when the world turned its back. One evening, as she sat in her grand home, overlooking a thriving city that had once been nothing but a dream, Mama Jara sat beside her. The old woman, now frail but still sharp, smiled at her. "You have built something great, my child," she said. "But more than that, you have shown the world that strength comes from the heart, not from gold." Abeni nodded, a soft smile on her lips. She had faced rejection, hardship, and loneliness. But she'd never allowed them to define her. Instead, she had turned her pain into purpose, her sorrow into strength. And so, her legacy lived on, not just in the wealth she'd accumulated, but in the lives she had changed. She had once been a girl abandoned in the dark, but she had become a light that would never be forgotten. Her story was no longer just her own. It belonged to every soul who had ever been cast aside, proving that even those who are rejected can rise to become legends.